And again, good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning as we dig a little deeper into the life insurance business and some of the techniques that are going to enable you to be better life insurance agents. Hopefully, you have joined us in the past. This is the fourth week of our information sessions. We started with 2 meetings on making the initial contact. One of those provided to us through one of our carriers. Second one provided by myself. We included for you at that time both scripts to call behind mail that you would send or scripts to use directly to clients that are already a part of your portfolio. We also added another presentation from another carrier, again helping you to discover where you could possibly find your next insurance sale, and from that discovery be able to identify, categorize the type of product that you may be preparing yourself to present to those clients. And today we're going to take the step into the health questionnaire. So just a couple of housekeeping notes to begin with. First and foremost, as always, we ask that you make sure that you're muted. We do believe we have everything muted out, but again, just in case. Questions that you may have, if you'll add them to the question box on the right-hand side, you'll see that little entry area. We'll address those questions at the end. I do apologize. Last week when I changed my screens over, I closed myself out of the presentation before I got to address the questions that were on the screen. So personally, Paul, I know you had something out there that I never did get back to. If that's still a question you have, you can, of course, give me a call here at the Messer office. And of course, for all of you out there today, this particular presentation is being recorded. You'll be able to find it by going over to the Messer website. At the very top ribbon, you'll find in the red line, Agent Resources. If you drop down on that Agent Resources, you'll find the link to go into our training or our presentations that have been recorded. You'll also find on that same section the opportunity to go ahead and get contracted with the carriers that, again, this year in our work, we're doing something a little different. That being that in the past, we have had carriers join us, giving them the opportunity to tell us about their products. This year, however, I've asked them to show us the way. If their presentation is going to generate a way for you to do better at your business, have some training technique to it, then we welcome them to come aboard, bring that to your attention, and then only then can they have that opportunity to tell us perhaps about how a product that they have will better fit that need. So we're trying to do this in an organized fashion to take you step by step through a life insurance sales training program, similar to what you might receive if you have the opportunity to tie yourself down and go captive with a carrier, so that you would be better prepared to meet that clientele. I think, as you all are aware today, a couple of things have had a change in our industry. The first and most important is fewer and fewer carriers are even developing captive teams. One of the companies that I had the opportunity to share time with or actually be captive with was MetLife. And MetLife no longer even has a sales team. In fact, MetLife is pretty much taking themselves away from all the activity involved with the life insurance business, and they have added those agents who once were a part of their captive sales team to another company that they are doing business with. And if you want any additional information on that, please go ahead and check back in with us, calling into the Messer office, and perhaps calling in and talking to one of our marketers at extension 819. You can always get additional support here at Messer at extension 813, which is our producer support team. And of course, we can help you all the way through from the basic steps of contracting to getting the information you need on products and the carriers themselves. So please do rely on us for that information. What we're going to do this morning again, what I call the health questionnaire. We're going to begin with the very first polling question. So if we can bring that up, we'll get into that. Okay, so the poll is now open. And basically what we're asking you first and foremost is, do you currently have a form, something that you use to enable you to gather the vital information that you're going to need on your client, not only for the purposes here today of getting into the life insurance sales, but really to have a document of information on your clients for references that you may use not only in the life business, but perhaps again when you go back and work on your health insurance, whether that be for an over or under 65 market. I'm going to give this a few more moments here to progress, and we'll see that at this particular point, a little bit more than half of you do have a form that you're using, but then again, a little bit less than half of you do not. So hopefully for all of you involved today, again, the information that we'll share will have a purpose, and you'll find it to be a good use for you going in the future. Okay, so I think I'll go ahead now and close the poll at the point of which we're saying we have 55% of the people on board today saying yes, they do have some type of form to use. And then again, we have 45% saying no, they don't. And that's a very good return on it. So if you notice on the right-hand side of your screen, there's that little Adobe icon, and it says Messer Health Questionnaire Fillable. So what we're going to do is put that health questionnaire up on the screen right now, and you'll see that it is a form that you can use. Let me close this off too. Okay. This is a fillable form, so if you want to download it and save it on your desktop, laptop, and have available. If you want to go ahead and print one off while you're sitting there this morning at your computer, of course, you could go ahead and save it and do that as well. And we'll start with the basic information. Now, as I've developed and worked with this form over the years, one of the things that comes up is I might get a call from a client letting me know that they've been talking about some of the business that I brought to their attention, and they're going to refer them to me. So I would, of course, at that time fill in their name on the sheet, or it might come directly from the call-in that I receive, someone saying to me, hey, John Jones asked me to give you a call. He mentioned that he's been working with you on his Medicare supplement plans. So I'll make sure I have a note, a way to remind me in the future, perhaps when I'm sending them a card for the holiday seasons, or perhaps when I'm talking to them about other business, that I don't forget that they've already sent business my way. And then, of course, there might be other activity taking place based on the amount of traffic they're sending to my door, as far as what other types of recognition I might want to establish with them for that future business. If during the process of the discussion on the phone, while we're either setting the appointment or in just general conversation, we do lock down a day and time that we're going to visit with that person, of course, I'm going to have that available And in this case, we're going to say that we're on the phone working with them, and we're going to schedule that appointment for a week out. So that'll be on April the 10th. I believe that's correct. And then I've got to have that appointment to meet with them in their home at 2:30 in the afternoon. And of course, most importantly, while I'm on the phone with them, I'm going to find out who I'm speaking to. And again, this might be because we made that cold call. So I've got this document at my desk when I am cold calling. If I'm calling from the mail that I sent out, perhaps as a follow-up to what is basically a cold call mailer that was again presented in our second week of information. If I'm dialing up from my case files, my existing clients, I still want to make sure that I've always got that particular file available with their name, etc. But I still want to go ahead and fill out one of these documents. So I'm talking to the person, and his name is Jimmy Smith. And one of the first things I'm going to ask Jimmy is if he married, and if so, the name of his spouse. Perhaps at this time or at a future time, I'm going to try to make sure that, if possible, I get a middle initial. And the reason I want to do that, to make sure that I'm identifying that person when we go into that life insurance application, especially with a name like Smith, that we make sure that we're being particular to the person involved. Date of birth. I want to emphasize, most important, how important this really is. I often get calls from agents who want me to help them with an illustration, and they are talking to me. Sometimes they're hesitant to tell me their client's name. I guess they think that I'm going to try to underscore them and pick up business, and that's really not the nature of why I'm here. But it helps if I have the name, number one, to do that illustration for you in a professional manner so that your client's name appears on that illustration. But most importantly, I need to know that date of birth. And more than not, I always have the person telling me, hey, they're 60 or years old, or they're 45 years old. The fact is, I need more than that. And the reason I do, most importantly, is the aging process. If your client is within 6 months of their birthday, they're going to be aged up by most insurance carriers. So even though you tell me they're 45 and their birthday happens to have been last October, they're already 6 months out, and they're now going to come in at 46 when I run the illustration. And of course, the importance of knowing that is they're going to be underwritten at that age of 46 versus at the age that you've told me that you thought they were 45. So in this case, I am going to calculate for myself. This is a December birth, so we're still not outside that 6-month window. So this client truly is 44. I might, just for practical purposes, give myself the benefit that I might get beyond that window, perhaps delayed in the actual process of taking an application, and start off working with them at 44, but not literally get it done until they are already in that window and age 45. And again, that age up process is going to have an effect on that actual price. It happened to me recently. I was working with one of the marketers in the office, and we were working with an agent who was trying to find long-term care, and the individual was 80 years old. Well, first of all, at 80 years old, you have a lot of draw or deadline dates there, and carriers who will not cover a long-term care offering beyond the age of 79. There are some that might, and there are some that will offer it perhaps in the format as a rider to a life insurance type of product. But even the rider itself might only be offered until that age of 80. My concern was in this case that without that date of birth, we didn't know for sure where that client was going to fall. And unfortunately, my worst thoughts became reality when we ran business illustrations at age 80, and it was determined that they were now 81. And once I went back in and plugged it into the illustration software, the offer was taken off the table, and there was not going to be any product to offer that client because of that date of birth. So it might be annoying to you when you call in and talk to me or one of the marketers, but I'm trying again to pound into everyone's mind the fact that we have to know that exact date of birth. So the reason that I've spent so much time on that particular subject today. Again, for both clients, we want to know that information. And we're going to make her a little younger. We're going to say she was born in 1975. And we use the June date. So in this case, she's not turned age yet. Her birthday is coming on. But again, the fact is that she is beyond that 6-month target. So in mind with her, even though the numbers tell us she's just 41, the fact is she is going to be aged up to 42 because she is now definitely within 6 months of that birthday or beyond the 6-month window from celebrating it. So this one I'm going to have to do my work, and you would also at 42 years of age. Now again, there are some companies out there that will use the current age, but you have to be very careful with that. Oftentimes those carriers will issue, but based on the date of issue, the client may be held hostage to have to pay back premium to age to that date. So in other words, if I were able to get this policy issued in a very rapid form and fashion, let's just say unrealistically perhaps in 30 days, and get it done by the 5th of May and be delivering that policy to that client that I worked with the current age of 41, that carrier might require with that actual policy delivery 6 months worth of premium to lock in that age 41, which at that point it's really not worth the cost to save age for that window of time. So seeing all this stuff in effect until you unfortunately have the problem, and I would rather you avoid having the problem, let's always make sure that we're working with the ages that are going to illustrate properly. So I would say this is probably one of the most important rules in information gathering to your clients. This one next is also going to rate either with it or right alongside of it, the height and weight. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the client today. We're going to put this gentleman at 6'2". We're going to put him in there at 225 pounds. And his wife, they've had a couple of kids, and she's had a little bit of trouble getting her weight back in effect after her pregnancy. So she's not quite in as great a condition as she was when they first met. and she's at 5'6" and 250 pounds. Now, not specifically today, but you're going to see actually next week, we're going to do a first and perhaps a second class on underwriting. And what we're going to do during that class is use the guidelines that we're going to provide to you again in a proprietary fashion, just as we have provided to you today this health insurance questionnaire, so that you're going to go ahead and be able to work with the information, begin to gather not only the information, but determine from the information the rating that this client is going to come in at, so that when you go about the purpose of quoting your client, you're not going to cause yourself the embarrassment of bringing to their attention a quote and a price that they're not going to qualify for. And now you're going to have to go back with an offer that's going to be less or more expensive than what you had set up to begin with, and put yourself in a bad situation. So fortunately, as we look at this gentleman at 6'2" and 225, he is definitely within the guidelines of standard or better health rating. However, when we look at her, even though she might be in great physical condition otherwise, the 5'6" and 250 actually just forced her into a second table rating. She would come in at about a table B. So my concern here, of course, would be that if you went in and you quoted her better than standard, and you get a offer from the carrier of a table B, and that price is going to be quite different, quite a bit more for that table B rating, you're probably going to lose that sale. It's difficult, I will say, and sometimes I have to ask, to speak to the spouse, or if I'm doing it in a formal setting in front of them as an information gathering, sometimes she's not that willing to say that's how much she weighs in front of her husband. Sometimes I even slide my worksheet across and say, fill that in for me, would you? And they laugh, and then she does. But again, it's given her that benefit of not having the embarrassment. Okay, so I think I've stressed this enough. But again, when you call in and I'm asking you for the information, who your client is, what their date of birth is, and what their height and weight is, right there, I've already eliminated problems that are exposed by many agents, unfortunately, by not doing the due diligence and getting that information to begin with. Okay, our basic information, this address, the city, the state, not that important, although you're going to need it on the application as well, but probably most important in the way you're taking the application. Here in Charlotte, North Carolina, it's not unusual for us to develop a clientele of interest in the state of South Carolina. So the importance there is going to be, of course, that state is going to be the application that I'm going to use if I'm meeting that client in their home, because I'm meeting them, let's just say, in South Carolina, or if I'm meeting them in my office here in Mint Hill, because they're going to sign it in my office in Mint Hill, I would be using a North Carolina application. So again, knowing that you have the correct information to begin with won't account for you having the embarrassing situation of not using the right app. Because many of you are health insurance agents, you're familiar with the saying, where you sleep. So where your health insurance is based on that address of where you sleep, the life insurance application is going to be different. It's going to be where that application was signed and where that application will be delivered. Be very careful about that as well. We're going to get into more of this as we're talking about completing an application, but some of the carriers actually ask that question on the original application. You know, it says place, signature, and place, and then it also may ask the question delivery in place. Obviously, you would recognize the need here to go forward and get the phone numbers that you have access to them. Home phone and cell phone today probably be the most important, that you do get a cell phone number. The fact that you have a home number to call, and you'll find, obviously, as you already know, when you're making calls to a home, it's not unusual for that phone to be tied to an answering machine that's not going to get you to where you need to go anyway. Let's make sure we get an email address. You're going to have the opportunity sometimes to email your clients additional documents that you may need to progress in a more quick fashion to the actual underwriting process that's involved. So again, I'm trying to make my life and your life a lot easier by always having the information I need at a quick reference area. Obviously, because this is a fillable form, when you do complete one, you would be able to save it if you're going to set up files on your desktop that way for your client. Or of course, you could go ahead and you could print the form if that is the action that you choose to take. I happen to still be a paper nightmare. I do keep all of my records on file, as well as to keep things on my desktop. Just, I guess, an old habit that's been difficult for me to break. So I actually do use a file jacket. I attach this form to the inside of the jacket, and then anytime I'm adding documents, whether it be the illustrations that I've used, perhaps a copy. Always good to have a copy of an application that you've sent into a carrier. You may have done it on a wet application, therefore you've given them the original. Make a copy. You may have done it online, which is the quickest and the easiest way to take applications today. But even during the time of taking an online application, you'll have a point at the end that you can either save it, again, drop it into your file that you set up on your desktop perhaps, or again, print yourself a copy to add to your file itself. Okay, so basic information, very important. We're going to ask some questions of them while we have the opportunity. And the very first one we're going to go to, and of course there's less and less of it today, but you definitely need to know if the client is a tobacco user. It's going to have a direct effect in the cost of the insurance. If you've been running quotes of recent, just to run comparisons, I think you'll be surprised if you haven't to come to the realization that a tobacco user today is going to pay in most cases twice the cost of a non-tobacco user. So with that in mind, before we ask the actual question of the client, let's ask you for another polling question. If you'll please take the time to give us an answer to this question. And as we're waiting here for enough of the attendees to come in. On that basic question, and that is, of course, can that proposed insured qualify for non-tobacco rate if they have quit smoking in less than the 12-month window of time? And again, here what we're talking about is actual tobacco use of smoking, not cigars or something to that effect. This is a true cigarette smoker who quit 10 months ago. Can they qualify for a non-tobacco rate? Okay. We've got better than half of the attendees responding, so at least I know half of you are still with me. And the majority, actually 85% of you, recognize the fact that no, you cannot qualify for a non-tobacco rate if you have been smoking in the last 12-month period of time. I also want you to know, we're going to get into it more when we talk about underwriting next week. There are certain records that are going to be referred to by that insurance carrier when they're doing their underwriting, and we'll discuss that and how they determine whether your client has been or has not been a tobacco user. All right, so we'll close off the second poll question, and actually we'll go right back to our third polling question. So if we can bring that one to your attention. Once again, I ask that you take the time to answer the question. A little bit trickier here. Can the proposed insured qualify for a preferred rating if they have been a non-tobacco user for 24 months, but less than 3 years? So again, 24 months they've been quit. Let's just say 25 months, but they haven't hit the 3-year window yet. Can they qualify for a preferred rating? Again, I'm waiting as the numbers come in, and we're getting a little stronger voting. If you haven't voted, I'll give you a couple of more moments here to vote, but I think more people are with me this time than they were the last time. And as we continue to go through the results, all right, let's go ahead and close this poll. And I'm going to tell you, the greater majority of you, 67%, think that a person can qualify for a preferred rating if they've quit for 24 or 25 months. Actually, the answer is no, they can't. 33% of you said no, they can't, and you are correct. There are exceptions. I can think of one carrier that we have in our portfolio that will consider that 25-month quit smoking as a preferred rate. Not preferred best, preferred, but the greater majority, almost, well, all carriers but that one. I'm not going to name that one particular today, but there is one out there that I know will consider them for preferred, but of course they're going to look at some other details as well in that age of that client, perhaps, as long as, and how long they have smoked before they're going to go there. So today's answer for the second question is actually no. Now again, what we were talking about here in tobacco use, and tobacco use does include cigars, it includes e-cigarettes, I don't know why, even though it's not a nicotine product, marijuana is going to fall under that tobacco use question. But let's start with cigars. Now, if a person is a regular cigar smoker, when they get their exam, nicotine is going to show up in that blood. So that's not a good sign. If, however, they are a occasional, or what's often referred to as a celebrative cigar smoker, you have a baby and you smoke, you're a golfer that gets in a round once a week, and you might have a cigar at the club afterwards. Provided the blood work doesn't show nicotine, that celebrative cigar smoker may pass as non-tobacco. But again, make sure when you determine from your client and they tell you no, they're not a tobacco user, never ever, but they do occasionally smoke a cigar, ask them to be sure not to smoke a cigar in the weeks advance of that paramed exam taking place to make sure nicotine doesn't show up. Because if the nicotine shows up, they're going to get hit with the tobacco rating, and there's nothing you can do to go back to the carrier and beg, borrow, or steal the fact that they were a occasional cigar smoker that had that nicotine appear at the time. Today, we're going to get in some additional questions, but very important questions being cancer. Have they had it in the past? Yes, no. If they have, we're going to have to dig a little deeper. We'll talk about that next week when we get into the true underwriting position. Have they had a heart problem? No, they haven't. If they have again, we're going to find out a little more information. And again, it'll make a lot more sense next week when I add to your assistance an actual booklet of underwriting guidelines. Blood pressure, yes. Well, let's give her the blood pressure based on the weight, and we'll say he's a no. Again, next week we're going to discuss key questions you need to ask about that elevated blood pressure to understand how it could affect the underwriting. Cholesterol question, and probably one of the most important is right here, other health conditions, because again, we've covered the most important, the ones that come up constantly, use of cigarettes, cancer, heart, blood pressure, cholesterol. But what if they have other conditions you haven't directly asked about? We need to know now. If they do give you a yes answer, then we're going to need to know exactly what they are. You've got a little bit of space here. We're going to say that she has sleep apnea. So that's going to be something else we're going to need to discover in our basic underwriting, what type of an effect that could have on her. But most importantly, too, with the questions, sometimes you can't really dig it all out of them. Sometimes they don't want to tell you that they have health issues. I don't know why people think this, but I guess they think if they don't tell you all the facts, that somehow miraculously it's going to slide through the underwriting of the insurance carrier. They're not going to realize. I just had one recently. I was working with an agent. Of course, she made the typical mistake that was unfortunate to rate a person preferred who failed to tell her that in one of his most recent doctor readings or visits, his A1C was over 6. Well, he's going to be diabetic. And of course, when the quote came back, or the offer from the carrier came back from a preferred rate quote to a table B, and in this case there were other issues, and he actually came back at a table 6. I think you can kind of get an idea of how far off the quote was from the agent to the offer that was made by the carrier. So my point here is, when we get to this section, if we haven't really got the information we needed on their health, it might come out right here when we ask them if they're taking any medications. We need to know the name, we need to know the dosage, and we need to know the frequency of that medication. And that's going to become very important, because there are certain medications that will automatically make one uninsurable. And if we know that up front, and we can check the meds against the list that'll be provided again next week, one of the things we're going to bring to your attention is a detailed medical risk guideline that's going to assist you in doing this basic underwriting. But we're going to say, for today's purposes, let me pull a medication out of my books that might not be good. So sorry about that. Didn't mean to leave you hanging there. I didn't know I didn't have my window open. Okay. So they just told us they have this medication, and we asked them a little bit more, and they tell us it's only a 20 milligram, and they only take it 1 time a day. So the medication that we happen to have up here is a generic name, and you're going to find this because you can use the websites for rx.com. You can look up medications and determine what the medication is used for. And we see a name like this, and it looks like a high blood pressure medication just from the name and the HLC. But actually, this is for Aricept. And that's the brand name for the medication itself. I'll let you look that up for your own homework today on the rx.com site. Keep that in mind as we get into next week and we start talking about underwriting. And let's just see if that medication could have any effect on the underwriting itself. So that's a little homework for you. Look up Aricept. Okay. Also, we need to find out if they've been in the hospital in the last 10 years. I think more of you that are working in the senior market recognize the importance of having that question answered as you're trying to move people within the Medicare supplement rules. Also, we're asking for within the last 10 years. And we've mentioned that the wife has had a couple of children. We haven't gotten into the details, but again, having those children, it's very possible, obviously, that she had them in the hospital. So that's not really going to count as a hospital stay. What we're looking for is anything that might have had a health-related issue that had them in the hospital. Do we need to know about a DWI? Yes, we do. We'll talk about that too when we get into the underwriting, and we'll talk about the categorization. Not going to hit you with polling questions today, but again, timetables are going to be very important if they have had a driving under the influence. Do they participate in any dangerous sports? Do they drive a race car? Do they drive a motorcycle? Do they occasionally like to go out and drop out of an airplane and open up a parachute? Do they climb do rock climbing? There's a number of things out there that might be considered dangerous that might have a effect on the rating that you wouldn't even think of off the top of your head, but it comes out later on. So we want to find out. Also, we want to find out, have they ever had a bankruptcy? We're going to give him a yes. We're going to give her a no. Perhaps he had a bankruptcy previous to their marriage, something that she wasn't held accountable for. Again, when we get into the actual guidelines and start talking about Medicare risk, believe it or not, bankruptcy can have as much of effect on them being declined for coverage as having had perhaps a heart attack in the last 6 months. So again, pertinent information that we need to know. Do they currently have life insurance? Yes, he's got a MetLife policy that an agent sold him years ago. You ask him, well, what type of a policy is that? He doesn't know. Great. When we meet, I'd like you to pull that policy out so I could do a policy review. You ask him, what the premium is. This will probably be a clue for you, because if the premium on this policy is small, it's probably a term. If it's larger, it's probably a permanent product. So you'll have a clue before you meet and to determine what type of a plan he has. But again, just if you can, for today's purposes on this initial contact, find out about the coverage. She says yes, she does. She has insurance from her workplace. That's going to be real important for you to know. We'll talk about that as we talk about workplace insurance and the effect that that could have. You pretty much know right away that this is going to have been a term. And she probably has very little premium and probably doesn't even remember what she pays because it's coming out of her paycheck every week. So she just says, I just can't remember what it is. Again, you're not going to really have the opportunity in this case to say, hey, have that policy available, but you might ask her to try to verify from her check how much the premium is. And she could ask at work just to verify that that face amount is $50,000 that the employer offered. Let's get the name of the children. Let's find out the child's date of birth. Height and weight are important if we're going to write individual policies on the children. We'll discover more of that when we actually get into our presentation, when we're doing our face-to-face with the client. So I might not get into that right now. I just want to know that we've got in the household a 16-year-old child. We've got a 10-year-old female. Pretty important too, I guess, today. Obviously, I'm using names that we're pretty familiar with, and we know Christopher is usually going to be a guy and Beverly is usually going to be a girl, but again, in today's world, that might not necessarily be the case. So you do want to make sure you ask them what sex they are, and I'm sorry, it's probably something I need to add to this form because I don't have it there. But more often it's the case that they give you a name that's basically of a foreign nature to you. I won't bring one up as an example because nothing's coming to mind right now, but you really can't tell from the name if it is a guy or a girl. So you need to know, again, for the purposes if we're going to do individual policies. Primary purpose here, though, of having the child information is that we can look at adding a rider for child insurance to one of the policies of the parent, just to have insurance for the kids without getting into a true insurance policy standalone. That again, we'll discuss when we get into our face-to-face and find out in our discovery and find out in our needs analysis, which, let me speak about that for just a moment. Again, next week, we're going to get into the basics of underwriting. I'm not sure, based on the platform of information that I have to share, whether that meeting next week is going to run 1 week or whether it might take me 2 weeks to get all the way through the underwriting guidelines and proper attestment so that we're doing a good job in writing up our quotes. The following week, when we do finish underwriting, we're going to get into what's called the needs analysis. That's going to be a very important step for you to determine the types of products of insurance that might be a better fit for your clients. Bearing in mind that just last week we had a great meeting with Shar, who helped you discover the life insurance sale and basically giving you some characteristics to categorize the type of policy you might be selling. But again, when we really get into our needs analysis, which I look forward to sharing with you again in 2 to 3 weeks, depending upon how the schedule of events fall. So kind of bear that in mind as we place these webinars up on our screen and send you the e-blasts. Sometimes I'm trying to advance that information out, and sometimes a change will have to take place. And then eventually we're going to get back to the platform where we can add in another carrier who has something to bring to the table, more in line with the selling techniques available to make you better salespeople. So we hopefully can do that as well. Let me just check. I hope today you've already had the time to go ahead and download off of that sidebar that health insurance questionnaire in the fillable format for your use. I'm going to do a quick check here to see if we do have any type of questions in here. And there, one of the questions we had earlier this morning was that they don't see the personal health questionnaire on our website, and that is correct, David. It's not on the website. The information that we're sharing during these live broadcasts of training are there for the agents who take the time out of their day. So I hope you've gone ahead and already downloaded it, because no, it's not going to be out there for someone who didn't attend the meeting and just wants to steal the information. It's not going to happen. We had a good question come out earlier as well regarding basal cell, wanting to know if basal cell would count towards cancer. Great question, Melanie. I'm going to ask that we hold that again until next week, when we'll start looking at the actual medical risk guidelines. And we'll be able to look that up. So that'll be a good little piece of homework for you at that time. Question came up from Ms. Robach regarding, should bankruptcy filed or not filed? Should we ask the question, filed or not filed? You could certainly ask that question. It certainly would be relevant. You could also find out if it was a Chapter 13 or a Chapter 7. The most important question that we need to know about the bankruptcy, and again, this was just on the form, yes or no, to provide for us, again, when we actually get into medical risk, even though bankruptcy wouldn't seem to be a medical risk. We're going to cover that in our review of medical risks and guidelines for underwriting. So let's save that as well, because there is a key question about bankruptcy that needs to be asked, that we'll have a question as to whether they're going to qualify or not qualify. I see someone already did their homework, Paul. Paul looked up to find out the medication that I threw out there, and asked all of you to do as a little homework assignment to find out what disease that was related to. Nice job, Paul. I'm not going to share with them the answer that you found, because that wouldn't be fair. I want them to do their homework just as well. But thanks, Paul, for being on top of it. Also, a good question came in from David when we're asking about insurance. What if they have more than one policy? What if they have it with more than one carrier? That's very important, David. Yes, if they do have more than one policy, add it to the notes, perhaps a side paper. Even on medications, sometimes we don't have enough space on the form where I've only given you 3 lines to add in all the medications they're taking. So you might have to flip it over or add a side sheet. Same thing with the insurance policies. And yes, it is very important that we know how much insurance they have, as again, we're going to get into a needs analysis form and be able to better determine how much insurance they may qualify for. And then we had a good question too. Cynthia, thank you, regarding weight. Are there carriers that are less sensitive to weight? Actually, no, Cynthia, there are not. The place that you may see allowance of a higher poundage to height, as I actually say about myself sometimes, I'm really not overweight, I'm just a little short. Anyway, final expense insurance, that's probably the place where they have a little bit more latitude. They let people be a little heavier than they do in the standard process of underwriting. Yes, some carriers may differ by 4 or 5 pounds in their evaluation, but the difference is so slight that unless we're really challenged and borderline, we might need to do a little bit more thorough investigation before we do. So we've come upon our time. It's 10 o'clock. I thank you all for being with me this morning. I look forward to your joining us again next week and having it available to you to get into the true Medicare underwriting process. The medical underwriting impairment process, to do a better job in determining what your people qualify for. Again, the question came up on looking up RX. you can pretty much go to www.rx.com. There are other websites as well that should come up when you pull that to look up prescription medications, Joe. And I guess I had a typo in there, so I apologize for that earlier today. Thank you again. Mark Hunter signing off. Look forward to meeting with you again next week at 9 o'clock.